What would happen if a restaurant owner secretly returned to his own establishment and discovered that the chef being sabotaged by the staff was actually the younger brother he had lost contact with for 7 years? Lucas Drayton stepped out of the old sedan, one hand adjusting the brim of his baseball cap, the other gently tugging at the collar of his neatly pressed light gray shirt. He was no longer the powerful man once featured on the cover of a business magazine with sharp eyes and a perfectly tailored bespoke suit. Today he was just an ordinary middle-aged man, a little weary, a little quiet, and seemingly searching for something long lost. No one in the restaurant recognized him, and that was understandable. It had been nearly 6 years since Lucas last set foot in the original location of Drayton's Prime Grill, the restaurant he once considered the greatest passion project of his life. He had stepped away from that kitchen when the chain expanded to its 12th branch, retreating to headquarters to manage the system from afar, distancing himself from kitchen decisions, staffing, and daily operations. He thought it was necessary for growth, but recent mixed reviews, some praising the food, others criticizing the unprofessional service and inconsistent quality, had stirred a growing unease within him, a sense of unrest, of refusal to accept decline. And tonight he returned unannounced. Posing as a traveling food blogger covering steakhouses across the western United States, Lucas used the alias Michael Grant to book a solo reservation. "Right this way, sir. Your table is by the window." The hostess smiled, gesturing politely. Lucas nodded and walked slowly past the rows of tables, his eyes scanning every detail. A carpet slightly frayed at the junction of 2 service zones, tablecloths ironed but not perfectly crisp, a young server adjusting silverware with a hint of hesitation. Something tugged at his gut, not because things were terrible, but because they were no longer perfect. His table offered a direct view into the open kitchen, where flames from the grill flickered against the glass shield and chefs in white jackets moved with a precision that resembled ballet, surrounded by the scent of smoke and the sizzle of searing meat. One of them caught Lucas's eye, a young man with sun-warmed skin and eyes that never stopped scanning the details of each dish, placing herbs as if they were the final strokes of an oil painting. "Good evening, I'm Lily, and I'll be your server tonight," a soft voice said. "Our special is bourbon-glazed grilled short ribs with caramelized red onions and melted blue cheese. It was created by our new head chef, Rael Pierce." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Rael? That name sounds familiar." "He was just promoted to head chef 3 months ago. Customers love the dishes he's created. Some say it reminds them of the very first meals ever served here." Lucas remained silent for a breath, then smiled. "I'll have that, rare, and 1 house salad." As he waited, he observed more than he spoke. The staff moved fluidly enough, yet the air between the kitchen and the servers felt tense. A female server handed over a ticket while frowning and saying something he couldn't hear, and Rael silently nodded before turning back to the heat of the stove. 17 minutes later, the dish arrived. A thick cut of rib, beautifully marbled, topped with just charred blue cheese that released an aroma mingling perfectly with the sweet smokiness of the bourbon glaze. Lucas sliced through it. The meat was tender and juicy, its pink hue like something out of a painting. The first bite touched his tongue, and he froze. It was sweet, subtly rich, and hauntingly deep in flavor. No mistake. This was a marinade only one person would know. Someone who once stood beside him in the backyard kitchen, under golden lights and the echo of his father's voice drifting in from the next room. "The flame is the soul of the dish. Don't let it die." Lucas set down his knife. He knew then, tonight was not just a quality check. It was the opening chapter of a story whose ending even he couldn't predict. A light rain was falling as Lucas returned to the restaurant on Tuesday evening. He wore a simple waterproof jacket and placed a takeout order through the app under the same alias, Michael Grant, arriving nearly 20 minutes earlier than the pickup time. He wasn't there to eat, but to listen, to observe the things that only surface when the owner isn't present. No one noticed the man sitting quietly on a small bench near the pickup area, where the lights were dimmer and away from the line of sight of managers and servers. Lucas pretended to scroll through his phone, subtly watching the kitchen through the narrow service window. Rael was still hard at work, hands in constant motion, eyes focused on every plate before it was passed to the counter. In a scene that seemed ordinary, 2 voices from the register behind him drifted into the quiet space, not loud, but clear enough to catch every word. Rael's doing that bourbon and truffle thing again today? Cassidy's voice, red-haired and slightly mocking. Thinks he's back in New York or something? Travis says that's the problem, Brielle, blonde, replied. He's turning this place into a showcase. Regulars just want simple steak. No need for all those artsy touches. Lucas's brow tightened at the mention of that name. Travis Beaumont, a name that nearly cost him control of 2 branches years ago during a bribery scandal involving chefs. Is the plan still on track? Cassidy asked, lowering her voice. Travis said just keep going. Rael will crack under pressure. I switched his salt last week with regular table salt. The look on his face in the kitchen. Abstract art, I tell you. They giggled. I've been messing with the kitchen ticket times. Added 10 minutes to every order. Manager thinks he's slow. Customers complain. It's brilliant. Lucas sat still. Each word cut like a blade. Oh, and the seafood thing, Brielle added. I moved the delivery schedule from morning to afternoon. Rael got chewed out for not prepping in time. He struggled through the whole dinner shift. Travis promised if it works and he gets head chef, he'll bring us in, even threw in concert tickets. Not to mention manager Robert's still tight with Travis from back in the day, so we're protected. Lucas gripped his phone tighter. This wasn't just sabotage. It was a calculated scheme, with a ringleader, accomplices, and someone shielding them from inside. A toxic web had rooted itself deep within this restaurant. Order for Grant's ready, someone called from the kitchen. Brielle brought out the bag. That'll be 5487, she said with a sweet smile. Lucas glanced up at her name tag, Brielle. Behind her was Cassidy at the register, unmistakable with her red hair. He nodded, paid by card, and kept his expression blank. Enjoy your meal, Brielle said. I'm sure I will, Lucas replied, his tone calm, eyes steady. But once he got to the car, he didn't leave right away. The takeout bag sat untouched on the passenger seat, while Lucas sat alone in the rain, his heart burning. He pulled out his phone and opened a notes app, typing line by line, names, behaviors, connections, details of the plan. No one would sabotage this restaurant without consequences, not under his watch. And certainly not when someone like Rael, clearly talented, clearly principled, was being pushed to the edge by petty schemers. In the dim glow of the parking lot, Lucas whispered a promise. Not to Rael, but to himself. The game has just begun. Lucas Drayton was not a man easily swayed by emotion, but ever since overhearing the conversation between Cassidy and Brielle, he couldn't sit still. Over the next 2 weeks, he returned to the flagship restaurant in different disguises. As a lunch guest with a reservation, a lone diner in the evening, and even as a quiet man sipping whiskey at the bar during peak hours. Each time he chose a different vantage point, watched in silence, and memorized even the subtlest expressions. And what stirred both admiration and sorrow in Lucas was Rael. Under clear pressure from a team that offered no support and a system slowly rotting at the base, Rael stood his ground. The kitchen blazed, orders poured in, and customer complaints, often triggered by others' deliberate sabotage, came without warning. Yet Rael never lashed out, never blamed anyone. Every plate that left his station was precise, sometimes exceeding expectations. Lucas had once been a head chef. He recognized the look of a man under strain, saw the red eyes from sleepless nights, the slight tremor in the hand gripping the knife from sheer exhaustion, yet still maintaining the perfect slice. One Saturday night during rush hour, Lucas sat at the bar where he had a clear view of the pass, the place where dishes were staged for servers. The kitchen was in high gear. Rael worked non-stop, sweat soaking through his collar. A steak was plated, so perfectly presented that the bartender next to Lucas gave a low whistle. But then, a young server returned the dish saying, "Guest says it's overcooked." Rael frowned and cut into it. Clearly a perfect medium rare. "This steak is as ordered," he replied calmly. "I temp-checked it." At that moment, Robert, the shift manager, stepped in. "The customer is always right. Do it again," he said with a forced smile. As Rael turned back to the station, Lucas saw it clearly. Jessica, one of the cashiers from earlier, subtly slipped an old ticket into the stack of completed orders. Robert immediately pulled it out, lifted his chin and said, "You need to pay more attention. This ticket's been sitting for 20 minutes. Rael pressed his lips together, nodded. "I'll remake it right away." Lucas tightened his grip around his whiskey glass, his eyes fixed on Rael's face, the calm still there, but a quiet sadness smoldering in his gaze. That night, Lucas witnessed something else. After the restaurant had closed, Rael sat alone in a corner of the kitchen, flipping through order tickets and carefully marking them in a notebook, the same kind of red-inked journal Lucas's father once used to grade dishes long ago. Rael had no idea someone was watching. He bowed his head, closed his eyes for a moment, then kept writing, as if each word carved deeper into his own belief. When Robert barged in to scold him for exceeding the ingredient budget, Rael simply nodded. No protest, no complaint, just quietly turned back to his notebook, writing as if each line etched his commitment even further. The following week at a weekday lunch, Lucas saw something that made his throat tighten. A customer complained their meal was cold. Instead of letting the staff handle it, Rael personally brought out a new plate, bowed slightly and said, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience. Here is a replacement, hot and to specification." Behind him, a sous chef whispered to a server, "He's the one who left the dish sitting there for 10 minutes, didn't tell anyone." The girl shrugged. That's what Travis wanted. Lucas left the restaurant that day with a weight pressing against his chest. What he thought would be a simple quality check had turned into a mission of protection, protecting a chef waging a quiet war alone and guarding the values Lucas once built with his own hands. And somewhere deep in his gut, a feeling stirred. That Rael wasn't just a gifted cook. He was something far more familiar than Lucas had ever imagined. Lucas Drayton was not someone who often looked back. But ever since that first bite of the special bourbon short rib, since seeing the focused eyes in that kitchen and the red ink in that familiar notebook, he could no longer deny it. There was something deeply familiar about Rael Pierce, not just in technique, but in something that felt closer to blood. That unsettling sense of recognition kept him tossing all night. And the next morning, before the sun had risen high, Lucas found himself at the headquarters of Drayton's Prime Grill for the first time in months, personally logging into the company's employee system. Flagship location, head chef, Rael Pierce, he repeated the name silently, dragging the cursor down to the details section. His mother's surname, Pierce, born in Portland, graduate of Le Cordon Bleu, a 3-year gap in the record before joining the company. Lucas opened the attachments, resume, transcripts, ID documents, and then he froze. Staring back from the driver's license photo was a young man in a white chef's coat, Rael Donovan Pierce, also known as Rael Donovan Drayton, his half-brother, estranged for over 7 years. Memories surged like a flood. Backyard dinners at their mother's house, grilling meat for their father. The afternoon spent perfecting pepper sauce in the tiny kitchen, when Rael was just a curious kid always asking, "Why don't we try something different?" Then came the bitter split. Lucas, on the verge of launching his first location, offered Rael, who had just dropped out of college, a job as a prep cook. Rael refused bluntly, saying, "I don't need you to hand me a chance. I want to earn it, not because I'm Lucas Drayton's brother." That was the last real conversation they had. What followed was silence, awkward holidays, missed birthdays, and years of distance. Now, Rael had kept his word. He hadn't used the Drayton name. He never revealed the connection. He applied under his mother's surname, passed every stage of evaluation, worked his way up from the bottom, and was promoted solely based on the quality of his dishes and customer feedback. No one knew he was the founder's brother. And likely, he had no idea that the stranger who had been quietly observing him all along was his own flesh and blood. Lucas sat motionless in the empty boardroom, gripping an old photo he had just pulled from his phone, the only one he still had. The two brothers standing beside their father, who wore an apron embroidered with the words, "Food needs fire, chefs need heart." That weathered photo now bore the weight of regret. Rael had quietly done everything Lucas had once preached, upholding quality, integrity, and refusing to exploit family ties. And yet Lucas hadn't seen him for who he was. Worse, Rael was being sabotaged by the very system Lucas had built, by the people he once trusted, by Travis, the former chef he had fired for unethical behavior, and by Robert, the manager he himself had promoted 3 years ago because of a clean resume, now conspiring with a man who had betrayed them. Lucas stood up, his gaze sharpening. This was no longer about Rael alone. This was an insult to the legacy he and his father had built together. The truth could no longer stay buried under this polished surface. He could not let his brother, the one who still remembered their father, who still cooked with techniques passed down through the years, who quietly carried the family's culinary story forward, be taken down by petty schemes. Lucas pulled out his phone. "I need the full security camera footage from the past 30 days at the flagship location. And please," he added, "make sure this stays completely confidential." The security surveillance room sat on the lowest floor of company headquarters, a place rarely visited except by IT technicians and the legal team. Lucas Drayton sat alone in the small room, the cold, dim light of the large screen casting a pale reflection on his pensive face. On the table were 2 cups of coffee, one still hot, one long cold since morning, and a long list of suspicious time frames flagged from the CCTV system. He had spent the entire day watching each clip, each gesture, each glance exchanged between staff members at the restaurant. And just as he suspected, the truth revealed itself, piece by piece. On camera 3, angled from the main kitchen, Jessica, in the midst of a busy shift, swiftly pulled an order ticket from the pending stack and slipped it into her apron pocket. On camera 5, at the back pantry, Brielle was seen switching a container labeled smoked sea salt with one labeled regular table salt. Both actions occurred during the exact window when Rael was summoned to the manager's office for a performance review. But the footage from the manager's office camera delivered the hardest blow. Robert, the restaurant manager Lucas himself had once promoted, was seated across from Travis Beaumont at a small cafe. A camera from across the street clearly captured the exchange of a thick envelope. The handshake that followed lasted too long. The confident smirk on Travis's face was the grin of a man reclaiming his kingdom, using pawns he had already placed. Lucas didn't look away from the screen. He was no longer angry. What he felt now was a betrayal that cut to the bone. He had built Drayton's Prime Grill not merely as a restaurant chain, but as a home, a space where people could rise based on merit. And now, the very person he once trusted most had allied with a man who had once tried to destroy him. Worse still, the cost of this treachery was falling on someone who least deserved it, Rael. But Lucas did not retreat. On the contrary, he began planning. A detailed internal report was sent to the legal department, marked with strict confidentiality. He called the internal security team. "I need a meeting with the entire flagship staff. Schedule it for tomorrow afternoon, 30 minutes before opening, and place someone on site to ensure order." He ended the call and drew a deep breath. That night, he didn't sleep. In the office still lit late into the evening, Lucas quietly slipped the silver founding chef pin back into the pocket of his coat, a symbol he hadn't worn in over 7 years. The next day, Lucas arrived at the restaurant earlier than planned. This time, there was no baseball cap or pale gray shirt. He wore a charcoal suit tailored in Milan, polished black leather shoes, and on his lapel, the old but gleaming badge, the emblem that every employee in the company knew. The founder had arrived. As Lucas walked through the doors of the restaurant, time seemed to pause for several heartbeats. The staff froze. The hostess dropped her scheduling tablet, and from deep inside, at the edge of the open kitchen, Rael turned his head, his eyes wide in disbelief. No one spoke, but everyone knew the winds had just changed. At exactly 5 p.m., the wall clock at Drayton's Prime Grill chimed once, a soft sound that seemed to echo all the way into the hearts of everyone present. Lucas Drayton stood in the center of the main dining room, which had just been rearranged into an emergency assembly space. This was no break room meeting, no training slideshow, and there were no pleasantries, no smiles. The staff stood in silence before him, everyone from the head kitchen team, bar, cashier, servers, and cleaning crew. Jessica and Brielle stood close together, their eyes shifting constantly. Robert emerged from the office, trying to appear composed, but each step he took betrayed him, heavy and trembling. And at the far end, near the glass wall, Rael stood tall, white chef's coat crisp, hands folded in front of him. His face was calm, but his eyes were a battlefield. Lucas stepped forward and opened the laptop already placed on the nearby table. The screen lit up and cast its glow onto the wall behind him, revealing the first image, Jessica removing an order slip from the stack. Then came footage of Brielle switching out a salt container, the storeroom door opening without a sound. Then the video from the coffee shop, clearly showing Robert shaking hands with Travis, long enough, unmistakable, damning. No one dared breathe. No one blinked. Each frame was an indictment. Lucas did not raise his voice. He didn't have to. His tone was low and steady, but each word carried the weight of iron and steel. This is not just unprofessionalism. This is a conspiracy, a betrayal. You deliberately sabotaged dishes, delayed orders, swapped ingredients, all in an attempt to bring down a talented chef. Why? He turned to Robert. Because of a hollow promise from a man who was once fired from this very place? Robert stammered something, but Lucas held up a hand to cut him off. You're terminated, effective immediately. Hand over your keys. Leave under security escort. His gaze shifted to Jessica and Brielle, both now pale as ash. As for you two, I don't need an explanation. Last I checked, this is a restaurant, not a battleground. You're both dismissed. Your names will never appear again in any establishment within this network. At once, the security team, already positioned near the exit, stepped in and instructed the three to leave. But Lucas was not finished. Anyone else who took part in this farce has 30 seconds to step forward. If not, I'll personally review every hour of camera footage from the past month. Anyone I find after this deadline will not only lose their job, but face legal consequences. After a beat of silence, 4 more staff members, 3 servers and a bartender, lowered their heads and stepped out of line. Lucas nodded, not with malice or scorn, but with the finality of a closing chapter. Thank you, at least, for some shred of honesty, he said quietly. When the door shut behind those who had been removed, the room felt as though a heavy weight had lifted. Lucas turned to face those who remained, the ones who had not joined in, who had either suffered in silence or chosen to stand for what was right. I know the past few days have not been easy, but your loyalty, I saw it, and it will be recognized. Finally, his gaze stopped on Rael. The young chef still stood motionless, his eyes now filled with quiet doubt and a sadness without name. Lucas gave a subtle nod, an invitation spoken without words. Rael, I'd like to speak with you privately, if you're willing. Rael simply nodded. As the two of them walked toward the office, every pair of eyes followed. Everyone knew that something significant had just ended. But just as clearly, the most important part might have only just begun. The office door closed behind them with a gentle click, but its echo seemed to seal the 7 years of silence between 2 men bound by blood. Lucas stood near the window, eyes scanning the kitchen where the staff was returning to their posts, trying to restore order after the storm. Rael remained still by the desk, hands lightly clasped behind his back, as if holding on to the last shred of professionalism to keep from being swept into something deeper, something personal. Pierce, Lucas began, his voice slightly hoarse, roughened by time. Your mother's last name. Clever. Rael frowned. He didn't respond immediately, just looked at the man in front of him as though peering into the past. Didn't think you'd recognize me, he finally said, quiet and deliberate. I didn't at first, Lucas admitted. But there are things technique alone can't replicate, like the way you sear a steak, or how you use just enough bourbon not to overpower the beef. I taught you that, didn't I? Rael lowered his head, a faint smile curling on his lips, tinged with both nostalgia and bitterness. I didn't come here to relive the past. I just wanted to earn everything on my own. No one knew I was your brother, and I wanted it to stay that way. And you did, Lucas nodded, stepping closer to the desk. Not just well, you were brilliant. You didn't just save this location, you brought it back to life. Rael lifted his gaze, his eyes now softer. So, what happens now? Am I being transferred? Turned into a heartwarming family story on social media? No, Lucas said firmly, then more gently. What happened today, if you want it to, stays in this room. You'll remain as executive chef under your real name, not because you're my brother, but because you've earned it. Rael sat down, exhaling a long breath as though he had been holding it in for months. What if I say no? I'll respect that, Lucas answered. But I hope you don't. Because Drayton's Prime Grill needs someone like you. Because Dad would be proud. And he hesitated, then offered a small smile. Because we have 7 years to make up for. Neither of them spoke for a while. Only the faint clinking of cutlery from afar filled the silence. Then Rael rose, walked toward Lucas and, instead of shaking hands, pulled him into a quiet embrace. No rush, no performance, just two men, two sons, two brothers, quietly acknowledging each other. "Family," Rael whispered. Lucas gave his brother's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Family." Outside, the air began to settle. Whispers turned back into movement. The restaurant lights glowed once more. The smell of steak, bourbon, and rich sauces drifted through the air again, and inside the back office, the Drayton brothers knew. This was not an ending. This was a new beginning, where blood, trust, and the fire of their shared craft had been reignited. 6 months after that defining confrontation, the flagship location of Drayton's Prime Grill, the very place that had once been Lucas's greatest pride and deepest disappointment, had been reborn. No longer a quiet restaurant with cold orders and evasive glances, it had become a vibrant destination, where reservations were booked a month in advance, and the food was featured in Northwest culinary magazines as a refreshing new standard of authenticity. Lucas stood silently at the end of the dining room, leaning gently against the oak-paneled wall he had once chosen with his own hands. He watched the service team move in harmony like notes on a symphony score, the executive chef calling out orders with firm yet warm authority, and the bursts of laughter from tables blending with the clinking of glasses, a symphony he had once dreamed of when he started it all. Last quarter, this branch broke the revenue record for the entire system, Lucas said softly as Rael approached, holding a freshly issued internal newsletter. "It wasn't me," Rael replied quietly. "It was the whole team." Lucas glanced at his brother. On Rael's crisp white chef's coat, the Drayton's Prime Grill logo now sat proudly beside his real name, Rael Drayton, executive chef, no longer Pierce, no longer a silent shadow in a forgotten kitchen. "Lauren, the new manager from Chicago, has done a great job," Rael added. "She fixed the scheduling gaps, restored the ordering system, and helped bridge the gap between the kitchen and the floor. No more division." Lucas nodded. "I read the report. For the first time in 2 years, not a single refund from a customer." They both looked toward the kitchen. There, new faces, young, focused, without skepticism or hostility, were working together like parts of a healthy living organism. "Dad would be proud," Lucas whispered, eyes drifting to the old photo hanging by the host stand. A man with kind eyes standing between his two sons, arms draped over their shoulders, smiling beneath a worn apron. Rael nodded. "He used to say, 'Food can be served in silence but must be cooked with a heart that speaks.' I finally understand what that means." Lucas checked his watch. "Speaking of which, I've arranged a special dinner." Rael raised an eyebrow. "For who?" Lucas smiled. "Mom, you forgot what today is, didn't you?" Realization flickered in Rael's eyes, followed by a smile like a rekindled flame. "So, this is payback for me hiding my identity for 6 months?" Lucas chuckled. "Let's call it even." They walked toward the entrance, where their mother's car had just pulled up. She stepped out, her silver hair neatly styled, eyes glistening as she saw her two sons, not distant shadows in awkward holiday gatherings, but two flames burning brightly in the same direction. They embraced her in a warm, complete hug, peaceful as if the years of hurt had never happened. Behind them, Drayton's Prime Grill remained lit. Heat from the kitchen pulsed outward. The sound of meat hitting the grill echoed like the heartbeat of a revived empire. And within those walls, trust, family, and integrity weren't just framed quotes. They were being cooked, served, and lived every single day. In a quiet moment, Lucas murmured, "Travis just got fired from Capitol Grill. Their revenue dropped 30% since he took over." Rael shrugged slightly. "Without fire in your hands, all that's left is smoke and ash." Lucas nodded. "Our fire is back." In the world of cuisine, technique can be learned, recipes can be copied, but integrity and family are things that can never be faked. Rael never needed a title to prove his worth, and Lucas relearned an old lesson, that sometimes, to keep the fire alive, one must return to where it first began. If you believe that true talent will always find its light, then, like this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more moving stories like this, and don't forget to leave a comment with the phrase, "Keep the flame," to help spread that spirit.